to see my dad running this, thing on the bench, showing them that it created a hotter spark. It did all this stuff. And then he would actually even furnish them, one of these ignition systems, the big old transistor solid state ignition system. And they got back to him, and they offered my dad a couple of those devices. Okay. They offered him a little bit of money. He signed it away because my dad was not a businessman. He was just happy that, I invented this. They like it. My dad could have been a multi-millionaire. Instead, he got a couple $100. And he got a couple solid-state ignitions that you could mount in your firewall. That was the early stages of it. But without that early stages, it would have never went into the computerized system in your car and all this stuff. My dad gave up the rights to that. It was crazy. But before that, when I was little, my dad was tinkering around with adding water and with fuel, and he made a modified carburetor that actually it took a certain percentage of gas and a certain percentage of water and mixed it in a mist, and it ran the car. And the car got a whole bunch of, miles a gallon. Again, my dad contacted somebody. Guess who ended up coming to the house? FBI and some other people came to the house and told my dad to stop.
Huh.
Okay, because my dad was trying to, he was sending this out to different companies and all this stuff, right? Well, he was told, no, you can't do this. And then Boeing Aircraft got involved in it, threatening to, fire my dad over it because he was developing stuff that technically belonged to Boeing's, because if you work at Boeing's, anything you invent belongs to Boeing Aircraft. But the whole point is, my dad had a system and it actually worked. I mean, he had an old Studebaker, he was putting it on, he had an old 57 Ford, he put it on, and it actually worked. But you know what? Because of, you mentioned the word, oil companies. Okay? He stepped on people's toes. So all I can say is there's things out there. If you do the wrong thing, something can happen to you. Because I know my dad was shook up enough where he took it off all the cars. He gave them the stuff, gave them all the schematics, gave them everything. And, that was the end of it. Now, you can believe that story or not, but I swear to God, it's absolutely true.
I've heard this story. Basically, just different names, different people. Different times.
I'm sure other people thought the same thing. Yeah, I'm sure my dad wasn't the only one. It came up with that idea. I'm sure there was many other people that came up with the same idea, tinkerers, but they didn't do it very long.
Well, and now think about this, and this goes out to your audience as well. All right. We drive cars that basically are no different than the ones that were being driven around in the 1930s, maybe as far back as the 1920s. Yeah, sure. I mean, they've got computers and you can get Wi-Fi on them and things like that. But basically, for the most part, they're not that much different. Now, are we to believe that in that amount of time that we have not been able to come up with any improvements on the internal combustion engine and beyond to drive our cars around? I find that hard to believe. Considering, you look at all of the advances in technology that has happened in that amount of time, away from, say, cars and burning coal and oil for energy and things like that. There have been such huge advancements in other tech lines. Yet, when it comes to the technology that involves, oil and other earth-based. That's the only word I can really come up with. Where you have to dig something up and then burn it to create energy. Not much has changed in a really long time, and I find that impossible to believe. So, I mean, I honestly do believe that there has been a suppression of technology because it would affect this cartel, this worldwide cartel. Now, guaranteed, if you did have a switchover from, our oil-based monetary system to something else, almost a type of free energy, because there's been a lot of scientists who allegedly have come up with ways to generate basically free energy over the years that have been suppressed. It is going to on the short term affect our economy, and it's definitely going to affect the economy of these of the rich elite who are actually running this planet.
Oh, you're so right on that. I will go one step farther. When my dad invented the solid state ignition, okay, my dad worked on it like you wouldn't believe. I mean, he made all kinds of tests with it, test after test. One thing it did, it created a hotter spark to the spark plug. Now, right. Back then you had points, you had the rotor, you had all this other stuff, but it created a hotter spark. It burned off the excess fuel that was being wasted. One thing my dad noticed, and he kept track like you wouldn't believe, every car he put it in, we had like 3 different cars he experimented with, and we had to go on these rides. Just for, hey, we're not actually going for a ride. It was to test out how many miles a gallon he would get. Sure. And he would go to a point A, stop, then go flip a switch under the hood, on the ignition system he made to turn it off, and then drive back and see the gas mileage. It drastically increased the gas mileage. But when they started coming out, they first started selling these, like J.C. Whitney and all these people started selling these solid state ignitions back then because of what my dad did. But first thing my dad noticed, because they gave him samples, naturally, that was part of the agreement when he gave him the schematics. They didn't give the gas mileage of what his did. And then my dad would look at it and, they changed this, they changed that. Well, you can't do that. Well, it made a more reliable ignition system because you didn't have the points burn up. They still used points at that time, but the points didn't burn up. But they modified it for one reason. Okay, it was a way to make money because, hey, we got a CD system you put in. It'll give you, a hotter spark or whatever, but they made sure it didn't give you much more gas mileage than it could have been. That's how it is. It's all about money.
Hey, Gary, Tim, do you remember the guy named Tom Ogle in the 1970s invented a car that got 100 mile per gallon per car, and he was only 24 years old, and he mysteriously died. Do you remember that in the 70s?
The name is familiar. Was he from Ohio? I don't remember where he was from. I remember when it happened, and he mysteriously disappeared. It speculated that the oil companies had something to do with it, because back in the 70s, 100 mile per gallon car.
It wasn't the oil companies. I hate to say it. Maybe it was the oil companies, but it was also the government. Because it would, you'd imagine if you had a car that got 100 miles a gallon or even 60 miles a gallon, what would it do to the economy? I mean, the big oil companies, the revenue that they produce, the taxes, well, they don't pay that much in taxes, but
no, they don't pay any taxes.
Yeah, but it would affect the economy big time. Seriously.
Yep. No. Well, but see, it's because And I'm not an economist, and people will be out there like, yeah, you're not. The economy is being manipulated by these energy concerns. So if and guaranteed, if a new alternative way of producing energy, came out, there would be a painful transition. There always is between the old system and the new system. And there are people who are, currently rich and getting more rich off of what's going on now, that would not be as rich when a new system comes in. So they are going to fight that tooth and nail, and if that means suppressing new technology, if that means murder and extortion, whatever, they're going to do it. And we've seen it happen before. Like the case you mentioned. There was one, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a very similar scenario. And I think this guy lived in Ohio, where he had come up with a way to increase mileage on a car substantially, and he had a really bad time of it. And then finally, he told his relatives that he thought he was being poisoned. Now, this was a guy who was like your dad. He was a garage tinker and inventor, and had done a number of things. And he just suddenly had this this spiral downwards in health, and he claimed that people were trying to kill him. He was shot at. It seems to me that his house burnt down, and then finally one day he just died of a mysterious heart attack. And and then all of his all the stuff that he had been working on mysteriously disappeared. The garage burnt down, that sort of thing. And but of course, even before all this started happening to him, he was undergoing just a vicious smear campaign on his device, on his car, and the gas savings. None of this is. He was accused of trying to extort money under fraudulent claims. I think that he had been arrested and attempted to be prosecuted several times under claims that he was trying to take money from people under fraudulent means on his alleged non-working inventions. And again, there have been a number of similar cases throughout modern history where people have really undergone the same kind of treatment, and I don't think it's a coincidence.
I agree, because I remember my dad being shook up when the FBI came to the house and all that stuff, and my dad wasn't even trying to market what he was doing, like with the carburetor and all that stuff, but he was going around to the auto parts stores. He was, going to, writing letters to, carburetor companies like Holley and saying, hey, I invented this thing that I can, we can mist water in it and, double the gas mileage and all that stuff. And it didn't take long before my dad got that visit, and saying, hey, knock off of it. I don't know. I wasn't privy to everything they said to my dad, but it shook my dad up enough where he, that was the end of it. He didn't go any farther. Hey, we're going to be back in about 2.5 minutes with Tim Swartz. Maybe we can now tie in a little bit more time travel again for the last half an hour. So we'll be back. So sit back and enjoy the break.